a Tuesday morning. On May 24th, 2022, the children of Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, walked through the front doors of their school with nothing but the excitement of a summer just days away from beginning. Backpacks bounced on small shoulders, and the hallways hummed with the kind of energy that only exists in the final stretch of a school year. But you're probably wondering how a morning this ordinary could become the last one that 19 of those children would ever experience. To understand what happened on that day, you have to go back to the night before, when an 18-year-old named Salvador Ramos sat alone in his bedroom posting messages online that almost nobody paid attention to, announcing in no uncertain terms what he intended to do. Ramos had a difficult life, and while that is not an excuse for anything that followed, it matters as context. He was raised largely without his father, moved between unstable households throughout his childhood, and was relentlessly bullied during his years at Uvalde High School. Former classmates described him as deeply withdrawn, a young man who had gradually cut himself off from almost everyone around him. In the weeks leading up to May 24th, he legally purchased 2 AR-15 style rifles, despite being only 18 years old, exploiting a loophole that lawmakers had debated closing for years without ever doing it. He also purchased hundreds of rounds of ammunition across multiple transactions. Nobody in his life intervened. Nobody called authorities. The warning signs were there, scattered, etc. Social media posts and erratic behavior, and they were missed entirely. On the morning of the attack, Ramos shot his grandmother in the face at their shared home before fleeing in her truck toward the school. She survived, though critically injured, and managed to call 911 before he reached Robb Elementary. That call came in at approximately 11:28 in the morning. By 11:33, Ramos had crashed the truck into a ditch near the school, exited the vehicle armed with a rifle and a backpack loaded with high-capacity magazines, and began walking toward the building as 2 school security officers in the parking lot failed to stop him. He entered through an unlocked door on the west side of the building and made his way down a hallway toward classrooms 111 and 112. What happened inside those 2 connected classrooms in the next few minutes is almost impossible to put into words. The students were 4th graders. Some of them were only 9 years old. Within a matter of moments after Ramos entered the room, 19 children and 2 teachers, Eva Mireles and Irma Garcia, were dead. The gunfire lasted less than 3 minutes before Ramos barricaded himself inside and the shooting stopped. Survivors who were present in those rooms would later describe the unimaginable experience of hiding beneath desks, crouching behind furniture, and whispering desperate calls to 911 from inside the locked classroom while begging officers to come through the door. And that is where this story takes a turn that shocked the entire country. Because outside those doors, there were officers, dozens of them. Within minutes of the first shots being fired, law enforcement from multiple agencies converged on the school. Uvalde police, Border Patrol agents, school district officers, and county deputies gathered in the hallway, just feet from the classroom doors. Armed, geared up, and ready. There were eventually more than 370 officers on site. And yet, for 77 minutes, not a single one of them entered those classrooms while children were still calling 911 from inside. Still bleeding, still alive, and whispering for help. 77 minutes. Think about what you can do in 77 minutes. You can drive across a city, finish a full meal, watch an entire television episode start to finish. In that same window of time, children were dying on a classroom floor, while law enforcement stood motionless in the hallway and did nothing. The man responsible for that decision was Pete Arredondo, the Uvalde Consolidated Independent School District Chief of Police, who had been designated as the incident commander on the scene. Arredondo made the call to treat the situation as a barricaded subject scenario rather than an active shooter situation. This distinction is critical, because the standard protocol for an active shooter event since the lessons of Columbine back in 1999 has been to engage immediately, regardless of risk to officers. The training was clear, the policy was written and distributed. Arredondo chose not to follow it. What made it even worse was that investigators later determined he had left his police radios behind before entering the building, making communication with other responding officers nearly impossible while children bled out just beyond the locked door. Parents arrived at the scene and were physically held back by officers while their children were dying just a few hundred feet away. Some were handcuffed. One father was pepper sprayed when he tried to push past the police line. A mother who had jogged to the school after receiving a call from her daughter inside was physically restrained from entering the building. She eventually broke free, climbed a fence, made her way into the school entirely on her own, and pulled her 2 children out. The contrast between her willingness to run headfirst into danger for her kids and the image of armed officers standing motionless in a hallway applying hand sanitizer and checking their phones is one of the most morally devastating pictures to come out of this entire catastrophe. The first breach of those classroom doors did not come from Uvalde police. It came from a Border Patrol tactical team that arrived on scene and made the decision to act when it became clear that no one else was going to. At approximately 12:50 in the afternoon, the Customs and Border Protection Tactical Unit stacked up outside classrooms 111 and 112, obtained a key from a school janitor, unlocked the door, entered the room, and killed Salvador Ramos. By that point, the 911 calls from inside the classroom had gone completely silent. The children who survived had been hiding among the dead for over an hour. One little girl had smeared the blood of her fallen classmates across her own body and played dead on the floor. She was 9 years old. In the days and weeks that followed, the full picture of the failures emerged piece by piece, and each new detail was worse than the one before it. Surveillance footage released months later showed officers in the hallway behaving as though they were waiting for a routine situation to resolve itself rather than responding to an ongoing massacre. A Texas House Committee investigation concluded in stark language that what happened on that day was an abject failure at every level of the law enforcement response. Arredondo was fired from his position in August 2022. The Uvalde School Board voted unanimously to remove him. He later faced criminal charges. But for the families of 19 children and 2 teachers, no termination, no investigation, and no court proceeding would ever come close to. Oh, adequate. The victims deserve to be remembered as people, not as numbers. Irma Garcia had been married to her husband Joe for 24 years. Joe Garcia died of a heart attack just 2 days after his wife was murdered. A grief so total and so immediate that it simply overwhelmed his body. Ava Mireles had been teaching for 17 years and was the kind of educator who stayed after hours to make sure every student felt understood. These were not abstract losses. They were children who had favorite foods, inside jokes with their friends, and plans for the summer that never came. I want to be direct about something here, because this story demands it. The reason 19 children died in Uvalde is not simply because a troubled young man walked into a school with a rifle. The reason is that a system built to protect children failed at nearly every conceivable point along the chain. The legal framework that allowed an 18-year-old to purchase military-style rifles and hundreds of rounds of ammunition without triggering a single intervention failed those kids. The unlocked school entry door failed those kids. The officers who chose inaction over danger failed those kids. And years of policy debate that produced nothing but more debate failed those kids too. Calling this a tragedy implies something unavoidable. What happened in Uvalde was a preventable catastrophe constructed out of a long series of choices made by adults who had the power and the responsibility to choose differently. In the months that followed, the Uvalde community became a site of sustained grief and unresolved anger. Parents of victims showed up to school board meetings demanding answers, and were largely ignored for months before any meaningful accountability came. The city itself, a small and tightly knit community of around 16,000 people, was torn open in a way that small towns are not designed to endure. The pain did not stay inside the walls of Robb Elementary. It spread through every household, every street, every relationship in that city. Crosses and flowers and photographs accumulated outside the school for weeks, each one bearing the name of a child who should have gone home that afternoon. Robb Elementary was eventually demolished in 2023. The building was cleared and the city began planning a permanent memorial on the site, a decision made in close consultation with the families. Some supported the demolition, others wanted it preserved. The disagreement itself reflected the impossible weight of trying to figure out what you do with a wound that size when no answer feels like nearly enough. It is the kind of grief that does not really go away. It just changes shape over time, and the people carrying it learn to move through the world with it permanently attached to them. The names of those 19 children and 2 teachers should be spoken and remembered. These were real people with real lives ahead of them, and they deserved every moment of it. Be kind to the people around you. Hold your family close, and if you ever see something in someone's behavior that doesn't sit right, say something to someone who can act on it, because the price of silence is sometimes a cost that innocent people have to pay with it. Very thing they have. Be a good person to the world, to your neighbors, and most importantly to yourself. May their souls rest in peace.